Hello and welcome to the Categorically Romance Podcast. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Bree.
And today we have joining us our friend Laura from the What to Read Next podcast. Laura, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me in the show.
Yeah, of course. It's great to finally have you on.
Right.
Yes, I'm excited to be on. I've been a huge fan of your show since its inception, since it was an idea. So I'm very excited.
So first and foremost, plug your podcast. Like, talk about What to Read Next. When did you start it? At the time you started it, like, what did the world of romance podcasting look like? And tell us all the things about What to Read Next.
So the What to Read Next podcast, the best way I can describe it is to find out what your favorite authors read. So I interview authors and ask them what books they recommend, which books they like, which books they don't like. And so, but it didn't start that way. The podcast started in December 2017. At this time, there were not a lot of romance podcasts out there. I think there were far and few between. And it started as a chatty episode with my friend Clara. We were just chatting and recommending books that we loved. Clara was a big reader. She introduced me. She's a big book collector. That's the best way I can describe it. She introduced me to all the used bookstores and all the good strand bookstores that were in New York City and just accumulating books. And so at the time in 2016, I had another podcast. I had two podcasts beforehand. And 2016, I discovered the passion for reading. I discovered YouTube because my issue with reading was I was always a reader, but I struggled with finding what to read next, finding recommendations. I was right was really high because there was a new book every month and I was diving into the series. So I read most of the series growing up. And then I ended up resurfacing, I moved to the States when I was 18 and discovered I knew Barnes & Nobles existed because I used to go to Barnes & Noble when I traveled to the US. But when I was in college, I would go to Barnes & Nobles and look at the end tables and be and at the time, this is the 2000s, and it was a lot of chick lit. And so I dive into chick lit, moved to New York, and I used to get my recommendations from people on the subway because this is before e-readers. So you just look at books and you're oh, that cover looks good. And I would just go to Barnes & Noble and buy it. Did not realize there was libraries that can get it for free. And then New York actually has a great library for free. And so I struggled with finding what to read. I was just reading what was popular. I'll find an author, read most of the backlist, whatever's available. And then 2016, this random influencer who's not a book influencer, I want to preface, this is not a book influencer, was basically she said hey, have you checked YouTube? There's book recommendations there. And I was what is that? And I discovered 2016 at the time was a lot of YA fantasy and there was very little romance content, but it was there. And I stumbled upon a new adult romance listicle video recommendation, and I read every single one of them. And I had a job where it allowed me to read at work because I had nothing to do, so I was reading on my phone. And between the Amazon algorithm and YouTube, I ended up reading 275 books between May and December. I was a reading machine. It was my reading era. The next year, I read a book a day. I think I was 361. So I missed the mark by 4 days, which is, it's kind of sad, but it is what it is. And so fast forward to November of 2017, my friend Clara was let's start a podcast. Because at the time, everyone was having a podcast of some sort. It sounded like a great idea. And I was I've done it before. I know how to do it. And so we started a podcast and we got through the first few months. She couldn't only commit to once a month. And as you probably noticed, I'm really good about creating content. And so I was I kind of want to do more than once a month. And so I asked her, I was can I just do this on my own? And she was totally gracious. She was totally cool. And she's going to come back to the show. She's come back a few years later. She'll come back this year. I'm trying to get her to come back. But I started creating content, and I started with interviewing influencers and asking them about their book recommendations. And I got really because when you talk to influencers, you probably notice a lot of times they're telling you the same books because those are the books that were being pushed by publishers. And I got really bored with that. So I switched things up. I went to BA and I was maybe I'll try authors, and at the time I was reading the authors' books. I was doing all the prep work, but I was I think authors might bring you a different flavor. And I started interviewing in 2019, authors, and I started interviewing any author. I was not discriminating. I was I only want to interview these people. I was no, I'm just going to pay my dues and interview whoever wants to. And I was a once a week episode with an author interview. 2020 happens. As we know, pandemic happens, no author events were happening. And so publishers at the time did not pay attention to my podcast. They were just like, okay, that's kind of cute, but we'll entertain the idea. And March 2020, April 2020, publicists were like, oh my gosh, we need to get publicity to these books. We need to find ways to showcase these books. Podcasts can be another avenue. And so my show became somewhat popular. Like it just grew because it was like I was getting a lot of pitches and I was accepting any pitch. And the beauty of a podcast, as you probably would know, is that they're evergreen content. Like people would discover a podcast at any point and they may go back to all the other episodes and they might find episodes from 2 or 3 years ago. And so it was like a really cool way to create content that's gonna long lasting selling. And so at the time, I was like, I just accepted any pitches. I really did. And so I think I went from I hyper focus in reading like hundreds of books in a year. I hyper focus and did like about 200 to 300 in author interviews in the span of 2 years. I think I'm up to 560 something episodes. There were times there were like 6 or 7 episodes to do. And so doing the interviews, I finally found my voice. I finally found what I was interested in. And so the best way I can describe my interviews are, we'll talk about the books they're promoting. We'll give a little bit spiel about it so you can figure out like if this is a book I want to read. But we're also going to talk about the reading taste, like what kind of books they read, what kind of books they recommend, what kind of books do you actually will like to pick up. So my goal is to bust out your TBR. So when you come out, you're like, okay, I want to find recommendations. I have a place where to find, and so authors will come and will tell you all types of books, the books they read, books that they're passionate about, books that they loved. I try not to ask their favorite books because that's actually a really tough question to ask. So I ask them questions that are like, recent books or books that you enjoy, books that you recommend, books that you feel like other people will be interested in reading. Chances are you may have your favorite romance author. I may have an interview for it, and then you may figure out what they read. What they read so you can pick it up for yourself.
Yeah, I think that is such a fun combination because you'll have like you had Sierra Simone and Julie Murphy, right? Like back in September. And it's like you get to hear them two like laugh and talk about this wonderful book that they've written. But then you also get to get a glimpse into like what's on their Kindle or what they just recently bought from the bookstore. Like you get to get book recommendations from the authors that you enjoy. So like how long into it did you realize like that's the direction you wanted to take the podcast?
I think I stumbled upon it. I realized I was like, it's when you're doing like hundreds of interviews and you don't have, at the time I was reading all the books and I was like, I am burned out. I cannot have these long conversations and all these different things. And I want to talk to these people because I want to get to know them. Like a part of me is like, I want to make friends with other people and I want to connect and have a social connection. I work from home. I don't have a car. And the time I was stuck in Chicago without like in a brand new place. I lived in New York beforehand and just moved to a new place. And so this was like my social connection. And so I realized it was like, well, I might as well just have something that I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is like finding out book recommendations. Like I just need to know what books are going to be worthwhile my time to read. Not just what the publishers tell me that I should read, but also like what true readers are reading. And so I love talking to other fellow readers, and what better way to connect with authors that way, because a lot of authors are readers first, or they have like a reader origin story, or they ended up stumbling upon writing for one reason or another, but they might just feel like, they may read other things because they're like, they need an escape. And it's kind of like fun just to get to know them that way, that level as a reader. And I think it's something fun for the audience to understand, like, what like other genres or discovering new hidden gems,
Well, you mentioned YouTube, and I wanted to talk with both of y'all about this because Aaron, you do YouTube, and I was like you, Laura, and Aaron, I'm pretty sure you'll have to share with us how you discovered people were talking on there. It was the same for me. I was like, people are talking about books on YouTube, and I kind of discovered YouTube as I found out people were talking about books there. But how do y'all think like the landscape of recommendations is changing? Like Aaron, as a YouTuber, do you feel like you still see a lot of recommendations videos, or is it just somebody's going to do a vlog and if you're interested in the book, that's your recommendation, you're going to pick it up? Like, how do you feel like it's changing?
Well, I've been like the worst booktube watcher lately with with doing the podcast and everything. So it's hard to say for me. I know some of my friends and favorite people on YouTube still do recommendations, like Heather at HEA Booktubes. She'll do themed recommendations of, if you like this type of romance, read these books. Whether it's kidnapped trope or mafia trope or forced proximity, whatever have you. So I've been seeing a lot of that, as opposed to like just the list of the wrap ups, I guess it would be what we would call them, in like the 2016 era of BookTube, which is when I got into it as well.
Yeah, there's more. I see a lot of more collaborations of like similar two booktubers doing the same listicle and coming up. And sometimes there's overlap, sometimes there's not overlap. So I think there's like I wish they can talk to each other and be like, okay, we're going to recommend different books before they come up with a video. But I see there's like more listicle videos. Do perform well, like in the grand scheme of things, because you look at the views, those tend to perform well. Like it's like, especially super niche ones, you're like, oh, I haven't heard of this. That's how I stumbled upon romance. It was a new adult listicle that Carol the Reading Wallflower did, and
I
she no
miss
longer.
her. Oh
I
my
miss her
god.
so much. She has changed my whole life. Of like, you would never imagine. And I wish I could tell her she's no longer in BookTube. I miss her. I used to look forward to her videos. I used to watch them while I was at work. And I used to be like, okay, like what did she say that I should read? And then I just like go buy the books and just like read them,
Yeah, because once upon a time, it was literally like her, Jess from Peace Love Books, and Lovely Like Laura. Like that was
Yeah.
it for romance. And they did read, there was some overlap, but their personalities were so different and there was
So
like
different.
a difference in books or whatever. And now it's just like, it's so cool to see how many romance booktubers there are now, I feel like. But yeah, I love the read alike lists. Like I love what is that? Like that's a librarian thing, right? Like whoever bought that to BookTube, I appreciate it so much.
Yeah. So I think I wish there was that. And like honestly, there's in the podcasting landscape, there's like hundreds of podcasts. Like I think I saw one of the fellow podcasters threw around a list of 150 romance podcasts out there that are out there. And I'm like, this is amazing. When I started, there wasn't that many,
Yeah. Okay. So tell us, like, when you started, because you started at a time where I'm assuming there was Smart Bitches Trashy Books because they were the first.
So I did not do the research. I wish I could tell you I did market research and stuff like that. I just thought it was a good idea. I can do a podcast, like,
yeah.
I think that's like it. Sometimes that's the best way to do it. Is like, you know what, like just do it.
Go
the
for
audience
it.
will find you. At the time, the first month, I had one friend who listened to it. No, none of my friends wanted to listen to our Alex rambling. So the first month, I only had one download, and I was like, okay, well, is this going to be success or not? And I was like, I'm just going to keep going. Like the audience will find each other. And so, so the landscape was just like not a lot. Like it was like there were some of them, and they were like, I think they were like, what should I read next? And I think Fated Mates may have started, but I did not discover Fated Mates until 2020. All these like big, in 2019, because I went to RWA and they did a podcast live, and I was like, what is this? So I did not know like the romance landscape, like the Heathen Blossoms and the whatever the other ones. I don't know. There were three major podcasts that they kept putting on listicles. I did not realize that they existed, when I started.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I remember like listening to the first like 3 episodes of Heaving Bosoms, and I was like, who are these people? And they're talking about romance.
Yeah.
So, okay, because I feel like you started in the Wild West days when it was like no man's land. So talk to us about like, how did you get publishers to, I don't want to say take you seriously, but I mean, I know you know what I'm talking about. Like, how did you get publishers to like work with you as a podcast?
So I started with warm publicity. So I started with publicists that I had experience before, and I just I went to them and I was like, I had this idea. I already had a podcast established. Like podcast was already established at some point, and there were two people that really helped me. Estelle, I went to BEA. At the time, I was taking a break from the podcast, and I went to Estelle, met Estelle in BEA because I wanted to get the Friend Zone at the time. This is 2019. Was getting a lot of reviews, and I had shared about the Friend Zone because I interviewed an editorial assistant back in February. And I was like, hey, the Friend Zone was mentioned here and all these different things. And so I told her, I was like, I just want to, can I get the copy of it? She's like, oh, I wish I can actually, why don't you just have Abby come on the show? And I was like, yeah, sure. That's totally fine. At the time, I did not have a podcast. I had an idea of the podcast was going to change and all these different things. And so, because I took breaks on the podcast, even though there's 5 years, there's been breaks. And so Estelle was like, you should do this. You should have Abby. And I was like, what, this is a good idea. Maybe I'll have authors come on the show. This is a good idea to have it. I was missing having it. I was hanging out in BEA with all these booktubers, and I was like, I don't have a platform. Maybe I'll just reignite the podcast. And so I went to publicists that I have met before, and I was like, hey, would you be interested in having so-and-so author come on the show? We'll talk about their writing, we'll talk about their books and stuff like that. And so I started reaching out, and then I just asked the publicist, I was like, do you have any of the books that you're talking about? And I used those pitches, because we get pitches every so often. And I used those pitches and said hey, I'm not interested in reviewing, but I can actually offer an author interview. And so I started that way. And then my name started to come on the list. I don't know, publicists talk to each other, I'm assuming. So it just started coming on lists and started getting pitches. And all I did was oh, you'd be interested in doing an interview. And at that point, I had created systems in place, a calendar system, a question system. And so I knew I automated different areas. So I was making things much more efficient. So I was able to produce more.
We have you here to talk about books, and I promise we'll get to it. But I'm always you never know who's listening. So once your name is out there, right? And I think this is a really important conversation to have because there's so many book influencers now, right? And the goal, everybody comes into this and your goal is you just want that connection. You want that right connect with that right person that's in the publishing world to get you some free books, right? So once your name is out there, what advice do you have to whether it's an aspiring podcaster or you're a wonderful blogger, a blogger? How do you I guess I think about one thing people don't realize is that eventually your name is out there and things can become overwhelming. Can you talk about having boundaries or plans in place? What do new people that are coming into this need to know?
So I think it's a relationship building. It's a relationship building with all publicists. Always be nice to them because you just never know what they may give you or what you can support them. It's a two-way street. They're supporting you by giving you gas and you're supporting them by promoting their book. So it's a two-way street relationship. But I think in some ways, being honest about where you are. There have been times where I take breaks. I just took recently a break. I was in a really mental health was just really iffy. And I had to be honest with the publicist and said, I'm really going through some stuff and I just need a break. And so being honest about it, that's a good way to go. As opposed to being oh, hiding, faking it till you make it. The other part is that it gets easier and it gets harder. Once you reach a level, it gets easier to get whoever you want to get. But at the same time, it gets harder to say no because there's so many opportunities to come up. So the best way I can approach it is are you going to have guests that you're going to be proud about yourself? You actually like these books and stuff like that. Those are the ones you want to say yes to. If you're iffy and there's certain guests that I'm I have audience members so I'm dying if you interview this person. I was yeah, it's never gonna happen. And that's just a personal it's a personal issue. It's a personal thing. I'm it doesn't align with my beliefs and the stuff. And at the end of the day, I'm the one producing the show. And so I have to do things that are in alignment to me. And I think in some ways it makes it more honest to my audience. It just gives you kind of I trust you and this is what I want to share.
Yeah. So, do you read a lot for fun? Or
it's a hit or miss. I've had therapists, I have reading coaches to walk me through this because I would say 2018 to 2021, at least actually recently 2022, I read a lot for the job. I read a lot for what was popular, what was hyped up, what was like influencer race, what needed to be on the show, who was needed to come. And it's a bad habit that I'm trying to break because it's just like not fun anymore. So I'm now trying to read for fun, and like that's been like the shift. And every so often when I get in the mindset, I'm like, oh, and this is where I am. I'm just like breaking this through. I was in the mindset of like, I need to read 2023 titles because I need to be in the know. And I was having an experience where like they're all meh. And I'm like, maybe I should not do that. Maybe I should start reading like for fun and go back to KO and like go back to the hidden gems that I'm like that no one's talking about, but that's where I want to like go back to, and read those books.
I have been, we have you here to talk about holiday titles.
Mhm.
I've messaged you this, like, I feel like I'm not seeing a lot. I mean, and I'm talking traditional published world. I know in indie, there are probably tons. I have some definitely downloaded on my Kindle, but here we are, it's December. What are y'all's thoughts? Like, are y'all seeing a lot of holiday TBRs? Do you feel like you're seeing a lot of new releases? Like, what? I saw a brilliant tweet yesterday from Rebecca Weatherspoon. Let me see if I can pick it, if I can find it real quick. So
Yeah.
she said yesterday, I just saw it. What happened to it? Okay, I have this really deep sinking feeling in my stomach that the whole publishing industry is trying to get rid of romance. This is the second huge list we've lost. I don't know what list she's talking
100
about.
USA Today. USA
Okay.
Today is gone.
Okay, MMBPB are being edged out, and the current reigning person in romance writes women's fiction and domestic thrillers. And I'm like, I remember years past, by December, I would have read like 21 Christmas books, right? Starting in September through December. And like, I think I've read like 3 this year.
Yeah.
I'm just not seeing a lot. So what's going on?
I think there are some traditional published this year. There was a lot of LGBTQ traditional published books, which was a great strike. However, the traditional published books, I feel like they're not as good as like some of the stuff that's coming out in indie. I will be honest, the stuff that's coming out in indie is actually they're taking risks, they're doing more stuff that it's more, I don't know, it feels like more like passionate about it. Like the traditional published, like I'm just hitting the beats and I'm like bam, 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 and here's it is. I was like, it feels like more like, sometimes more of the same. Some of the stuff I read is good, but some of the other stuff I'm like, I'm disappointed. Like I wish it was something more. I wish it was like more, so and so things. So there are holiday books coming out. It's just like, what the landscape looks like. There are novellas, there are other things. And like I think what the reader's looking for is a little bit of everything. I think the holiday novellas perform better in some ways because we're short of time, we don't have the space, we're trying to do all the different things, and that works. So like holiday, audiobooks are helping too because I'm like, you actually have something to listen to while you're doing your chores, So the landscape is shifting, and so, but I don't know if traditional publish is catching up to it.
Tell us what books you recommend. We're turning the tables on you, Laura,
Okay.
from What to Read Next. What books
Okay,
do you
so
recommend?
I don't think there's enough of spicy books in the holiday space. Like, what we see, we get to see a lot of Hallmark movies versus like, like Just a Kiss in the End, and that's fine. But I like romance. I like spicy, even though I skip the spicy scenes. But that's my story. But we'll take it. It's just me. So I would say like the 3 spicy books that I really love that have been like every year consistently. There's always one Kindle book that's like make the rounds, and some of them I'm an early adopter, some of them I'm not. First one is Faking Under the Mistletoe by Ashley Shepard. I don't think she has written anything afterwards, but that book is just perfection. I don't remember much, but it's just in KU, it's perfection for it. The next year, I had A Very Bossy Christmas by Kaylee Loring. She actually ended up doing a Valentine's Day and St. Patrick's Day book, and this is like, it's like fake dating, boss, I'm going to make you be my fake girlfriend to travel, and I'm going to give you a Christmas day for free. Like, like it's like suspend disbelief, but it's really good. It's a fun novella. It's available in Kindle Limited. And then this year I was actually an early adopter, and then I'm really grateful that people are reading it and talking about it, and it's like number 1, number 2 in Amazon bestseller list at the time. It's 'Tis the Season for Revenge by Morgan Elizabeth. That is a Legally Blonde reimagined, but instead of Elle Woods going back to school, going back to Harvard, she just dates the partner and finds revenge with her ex douchebag. And it's so freaking good. It's like around 200 something pages. I read it in one sitting. I could not stop reading it. It's spicy. The hero Damien is like, it's such a like a good book boyfriend. He's like everything you want in a healthy relationship, and that's like really good. So 'tis the season for revenge, and it's so good. And it's set in New York, and there's some New York issues that I have because I actually have issues. I live in New York, so I have issues with that. But overall, the book is great.
So I need to get that Very Bossy Christmas because I have the Valentine's one physically, and I'm like, why didn't I ever get the Christmas one?
The Valentine Day one is like about a train ride. It's really cute. I have not read the St. Patrick's Day, but Valentine's Day it's like a really cute one. It's like a train ride thing. They're like, it's a friends to lovers one. But this
And
one
I
is
feel
like enemies to lovers.
I feel like I've had faking under the mistletoe in my Amazon cart for like 3 years now at this
I
point.
think
I
so.
need
It was popular, I think, like 3 or 4 years ago. It was really popular. Everyone was reading it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I must read it. It's illustrated cover, Kindle Unlimited. And then I read it. I was like, oh, this is great.
So do you have any buzzwords, or are you just like, oh, it's a Christmas romance on Kindle Unlimited, I'm gonna read it?
It depends. Cute covers will fall. I actually scroll through like listicles or people writing TBR. So this year I was like handpicking. I read a lot of Christmas books, and so I went through. I think I got my Discover page showing up a lot of Christmas TBRs. And so I was like looking and I was like, okay, this book sounds good. This book sounds good. I also interviewed people this year. I interviewed Leslie from She Reads Romance Books. And she talked about some of the books that she's read. And I interviewed Kelly from Boobies and Newbies and talked about spicy recommendations. So I took some of the recommendations and then Stormo created a list of books that I was going to read. And I ended up reading some of them, and some of them I was like disappointed, and some of them I'm like, oh, this was great. And so yeah, I had like a pretty, and like a lot of the books were like, if they were in Kindle Limited, they were like a plus because I did not have to buy them. And if there were novellas, it would be better because I can read them in one sitting.
I mean, and talk about spicy Christmas book. I mean, we do have to shout out Kelly with Meet Me in Los Feliz.
That was like such a good warm weather Christmas
Yes.
novella. It was like it's everything I want. And I'm like, even though it's set in LA, I can see some stuff like happening in New York. It's like a city girl kind of like Christmas novella, because a lot of the books that I read of Christmas stuff is set in a small town. And it's fine, but like I'm not a small town girl. I'm a city girl through and through, and I'm like, I need my city stuff.
I know there's something so special about Christmas in the city. Like I love me a small town romance, but I love Christmas in the city. Okay, so you gave us some spicy recs. Do you have any like sweet any for our sweet readers or no?
So for sweet readers, I have a couple ones that are kind of cute. I would say Seasons of Love by Helena Greer. It's set in a Christmas tree farm. There's some Jewish representation, but it's actually like a group of friends inherit a Christmas tree farm and they have to come work together, and they're like, and there's a long lost granddaughter coming back to a small town, and it's like coming together and like putting it all together. So that was a really good one. A Cat Cafe Christmas by Cody Gray. If you love cats, this is like a cat cafe kind of thing. Each cat has an Instagram profile. You get to read it, and you just like it's perfect for cat lovers. I would say also Cody Gray also writes as Cody Hall. And so she has Megan Noel's A Christmas Playlist. There's Something About Mary, and then there's a new one, Audible Plus. So there's 3, and they're Audible first. So if you have Audible Plus, which is it's like the cheapest the free library, you might be able to listen to those books online early, or you can like read them too. They've been published. The first 2 books have been published by source books, but those are good. I did read A Very Merry Bromance by Lisa K. Adams. That's the 5th book in the Bromance Book Club, and they read a holiday book, and it's cute. It's like cute one. And then the other one I would say is Love Life Farms by B.K. Borenson. It's cute. The audio is on a Hoopla, so it's in a script too. So if you need the audio, like you want to get it for free, audio's there. But BK, this series is more like Stars Hollow Gilmore Girls world. and you can actually read them on Kindle Unlimited too.
And she like blew up. People are obsessed with that series.
She did. Even Victoria Blue Lifestyle is reading her book. She's like, I just found this book. And I was like, yeah, I already did a list about it. And I actually, by the way, if you go to my blog, there's a list of 10 books. If you look for Christmas Tree Farm, if you want to find Christmas Tree Farm recommendations, I have 10 books that are set in a Christmas Tree Farm because that's a popular niche within the holiday space.
Shout out to BK Morrison.
They're like, shout out to BK Morrison, and then Seasons of Love is another one. In the Event of Love is another one. There's 10 different books set in a Christmas Tree Farm because I know that's what you may need.
Yeah. She's got you covered. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us like what's going on with the blog. I mean, what posts do you have coming up? You do a lot. You put in a lot of work with the blog and the podcast. You're always like, oh yeah, we researched this today and found out this about Google. And you like,
yeah.
we set up a YouTube channel for the podcast literally because I remember you being like, YouTube's connected to Google. And I was like, she's so right. Like I will see my friends' videos that are scheduled. They haven't even come out yet, but like they will pop up on Google. And I'm like, oh, we're totally missing a mark here. So, what's going on with the what's going on with the blog?
So I became fascinated with the whole idea of search engine optimization. It's like very like the back end of blogging and podcasting. My podcast, if you probably would know, I don't promote it that often. I don't post it on the social media. I don't talk about this, but my podcast has grown a lot because people find it thanks to the title, thanks to the keywords of like finding authors. And so there's discoverability that has happened organically. Like the audience that I have is organically built. And so I was like, what if I just do this for the blog too? Like, what if I create written content and supplement? Because it's fun to do podcasting, but you get to the point where like, okay, do I really want to bombard you with 1,000 episodes? Or do I want to make you like, if you're just having a question about recommendation, do you need to listen to the episode or can you just like read it? And so I was like, maybe providing the opportunity to read the listicle. And so for the blog, I am doing lookalikes, as I mentioned. Like if you find a popular book, and then I'll give you like 10 books to recommend based on the trope that's mentioned in that book. So I have like read-alikes for book lovers, Love on the Brain, Something Wilder, and then like I'm starting to do some indies, so Love Like Farms, and then I did Tis the Season for Revenge. So I'm doing lookalikes for like, so you're like whatever you're in the reading mood, because my purpose in life in this space is to help you figure out what to read next, to help you figure out like, so you're not struggling to find recommendations. So you have like a place to be like, okay, I need this I'm in a reading slump. What can I read now? And so I hope that you find like resources to give you like enough recommendations to figure out what to pick next.
Well, we are so grateful for all your hard work.
Yes.
Thank you so much. So is there anything coming up that you haven't read that you're excited for? Like anything on your radar?
I don't.
I know you said a lot of the 2023s were kind of
I did the 2023, but I'm putting that on hold. So I think one of my radar is to find the next bestseller in Kindle Unlimited, what's going to be the hidden gems. And so I think I'm going to try to focus on those, like finding those hidden gems there, and try to be an early adopter for them, as opposed to be like, afterwards the hyped up. So a lot of trying different authors. I think my goal for 2023 is to read some monster romance, read some new to me authors, and read some more diverse authors. So try like different things. And so try them out.
Yeah. Well, you'll have to come back and tell us about your progress. Just saying.
Sounds good.
Well, plug all of your stuff. Where can everyone keep up with you online?
So you can visit the WhatToReadNextBlog.com. That's a hub where there actually has the podcast information. It has the website information. I also have a sister site called What to Listen Next. It's at early stages, so there's some content, but my goal is next year to have a lot of content there, and that's for audiobooks. So because podcasting lends itself really well for audiobooks listeners, so I want to help you find your next audiobook through narrator list. So yeah.
Well, you're incredible. You'll have to come back. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you.